Hello everyone, and welcome to the last unit of SEP 383. Thanks for taking time to check it out and tune in. Let me get ourselves adjusted here just a bit. That's pretty close, I think. Hope everyone's doing well. It's a lovely day here in Morgantown. Lovely day for a podcast. And the last unit is really going to focus on the applied elements of exercise psychology. Applied meaning how do you take some of these theories and principles and some of the research and then translate it into actual practice, which I think a lot of students are generally interested in. And the assumption from a class like this is that many of you will end up working with folks in some capacity as a counselor, a personal trainer, a coach, an athletic trainer. And so you may understand motivation, for example, but how do you actually translate that into helping an injured athlete being more motivated? Or you might have an uncle who's really overweight and you want to help him to lose weight, but how do you translate what you know and what you've come to understand in terms of the research into an actual intervention of some kind? So what we're going to focus on in this unit is some of the research factors related to adherence. We're going to look at some data from WVU students that we've collected a few years ago, just to give you a sense on who and what factors are linked with who's exercising more at the Student Rec Center, so you can see an application of the research on students and data you might understand. We're going to look at and review the behavior change principles, and I would encourage you to check out, there's an additional handout in the resources folder that goes over some of the big lessons from the behavior change theories that you guys read about in a previous unit. We're going to look at a model that will help people prevent relapse, because probably, as you remember from your readings, there are a lot of studies, and generally it's between around 50% of people dropping out in the short term after starting an exercise program. We're going to talk about how to use surveys, use assessments in these programs, and then generally just how to set up a structured program. We're going to explore one case study as well, just to give you an example, and it should be helpful to you as you are doing your case study assignment for this last unit. I think a lot of the material in this unit as well should be helpful in putting together your behavior change final paper, because remember, you've got to integrate at least one theory in a very specific way as to how that theory frames up and how your experience fits into the theory or how well it does not. So hopefully a lot of the material will be very useful, and I'm hopeful that if you continued to study some of this material, it would actually make you a better professional, particularly if you're ending up in any sort of helping capacity, helping folks change their behaviors, whether it be related to exercise or not. It could be diet, it could be injury rehab or something of that nature. A lot of the material will still hopefully be helpful. Getting into a bit of the research, you might, as you might know, as you might have read in one of the first chapters in the textbook, adolescence is a critical period where, unfortunately, due to a lot of school curriculum issues, there's a significant decline from about age 12, about when folks head into 6th grade, middle school, all the way through high school, and it's very sharp drop off for girls during that period, and less so for boys, because boys are more engaged in sport through that period than are girls, and there's more opportunities for boys to play sports than for girls in many parts of the country. In the college years, if you're wondering, it's also a reasonably critical period for developing physical activity habits and nutritional habits. And there is some research out there to suggest that the patterns you develop in college while you're a university student, between 18 and 25, those younger years, can help you later on as you transition into the working world. So if you establish a healthy eating pattern, for example, you may be more likely to stick with that later on in your adult life, whereas if you do not and you adopt a very unhealthy eating pattern or physical activity pattern, then it may be more difficult for you to adjust and adapt to that behavior later on. There are some factors that are demographic that relate to adherence to exercise behavior. So if you are a minority status, if you're older, if you're less educated and have less income, then you are less likely to be physically active. And something that those factors share is basically less access to resources, particularly for those folks who are lower SES, lower education. So you have less knowledge, and then you have less access to the opportunities to be physically active. And then here's a stat that I had mentioned before, and different studies will find lower than 50%, greater than 50%, but many people drop out. In one of our programs that we run now, it's a weight loss program across the state of West Virginia, and in the first 3 months they do very well. They only lose about 20%, and we have about a 50% dropout rate at 1 year, which is better than most programs. So that would be significantly better than most, and some of those people who drop out don't necessarily stop being physically active, they just stop coming to the fitness site. So one of the issues of adherence that if you're working with somebody is you want to identify and help people before they drop out, because obviously by the time they've dropped out, they're not returning your phone calls or your emails at that point either. Okay. Some additional factors, more from the psychosocial, moving beyond demographic factors. Yes, self-motivation and placing a high priority on physical activity, and that would be your ability to plan time effectively. Coping skills means if you're under stress, do you have the ability to adjust and still get your physical activity in even when it's a stressful week? So something happens with your kids and they have busier activities, but yet you're still able to plan your time and cope with that additional stress and at least get some of your physical activity in to keep the momentum going. Or when something stressful comes up, do you just get totally disrupted and you're no longer able to maintain the goals that you set for yourself? Support's important, and in the adult world, the support of your spouse and family is the most critical. Having access to something, and this should probably say equipment as well, easy access to facilities or equipment. This means you could have things at home if you would use them, somewhere to walk near your house. You can imagine, or maybe you wouldn't imagine, but the most likely place that people will exercise is from their home. It's the most common destination, walking your dog, taking a walk from there, riding a bike from there. It's definitely the most common, not a fitness center. College students often miss this, and I certainly would have when I was 20 years old. The idea of fitness centers is not necessarily a totally American concept, but it is a very strong part of youth culture in the U.S., but not in a lot of other places. And once you get outside of a certain window where you're single or particularly married and have no kids, gyms don't become very functional places to go because they require a lot of time and distance, and they are expensive in some cases. So if you take my scenario, I have 2 small kids. I simply don't want to be at the gym too often, particularly when it's going to take me away from them. So I'd rather work out at home. I'd rather exercise with them. I'd rather do it in a context where it doesn't remove me from spending time with them. So going to the gym, particularly folks who have to travel to go to an exercise facility, it becomes a 2-hour experience, and then that's a real hard thing to fit in versus walking a mile at lunch or sneaking 15-20 minutes in at a certain time. So that access factor links back to your built environment unit. Belief in prioritizing good health is important. Here's one you wouldn't think of intuitively, but if you're at high risk for heart disease or if you've had a heart attack, is actually predictive of positive adherence. So good adherence, because you've got the fear of God in you, basically. You've now been scared. You have a motive that is extrinsic, that is lighting that fire, and it doesn't go away. So one of the downsides of extrinsically motivated factors versus self-motivation at the top is, external motives do light the fire, but they basically burn out over time. But when you have a high risk situation, such as heart disease, or you've come off of a heart attack, that fire stays lit pretty good for a while. So it will continue to burn even though it's extrinsic, so the person may have some time to develop something that they actually like that will continue to reignite the fire. Otherwise, it better be a very, very strong extrinsic motive. Lower to moderate intensities of exercise are most predictive of adherence. The more difficult you make the exercise, the more intense, the more uncomfortable the experience is for many people, and therefore the less likely they are to continue it. So it's another reason for you to kind of get out of that athlete mentality. I can imagine many of you, I know we have a lot of athletic trainers that have to take this course, and if you've been around WVU athletes enough and then you went to work in a physical therapy setting, you're going to see a lot of people who are clearly not athletes. So how they approach the physical aspects of rehab is going to be totally different from any of the college level athletes, not just their age, but their approach as an athlete versus a non-athlete. And so the feeling of exercise, the feeling of the burn, the pain, whatever it might be interpreted quite differently from non-athlete types than from those who with a strong athletic background. And some other factors that are predictive of dropout would be, having a blue collar, working job, coal miner, working a mill, working a plant, straight up blue collar work, construction, joining structured exercise facilities, just doesn't stick very much. Having a sedentary occupation, such as a secretary, a teacher, also difficult. Being obese, which links with the next one, having discomfort during exercise, smoking, a high frequency of excuses. So if you're kind of a neurotic person, always has a lot of excuses or negative thoughts, that will disrupt and give you opportunities to really ruin your own plans. And then a person's inability to prioritize their exercise or their health. I mean, we all have a lot of things going on in our lives that compete for time, and things like family, spouses, friends, it's hard to compete with these factors. So I wouldn't suggest that someone needs to prioritize their exercise habits or their health above those things, but they certainly need to be in the ballpark, because if they're not, then it's going to be tough to be an effective parent. If, for example, you're so overweight that you can't really carry your kids around, or you can't tie your own shoes. And I've worked with people that have those problems. And so at some point they do realize, wow, this is really keeping me from doing what I want to do. And many of them have told me that they didn't get motivated to start being physically active until they realized that maybe they wouldn't see their kids graduate, or they wouldn't see their kids get married. All the big things that we would look forward to as adults and parents, they're starting to realize that maybe won't occur because of their own health. And so that kind of jumps that health up there into the same zone as some of those other very important things in our lives. Work is another thing that needs to be meshed. You can't pay your bills exercising unless you're a pro athlete. So most people, when it comes down to it, if they're asked to do something for work, and that's what's paying their bills and keeping the roof over their head and feeding their children, they're going to have to prioritize work. So exercise has to fit into the other important things in a person's life, and it's really one of the first questions I ask people when I meet with them is, just tell me about your week. What does it look like? What are the things that are regularly in there? And that would include their work schedule, any recurring social obligations such as scouts, or they've got sports travel duty for their kids, they've got social activities at their church. You want to get the picture of their week first, and then see how they're trying to fit exercise into the week that they've already been doing for months or years, to see how realistic it is. So if they can't prioritize it within that weekly schedule, it will not work, and they will drop out sooner or later. So those factors that I just went over are the factors that I want you to identify and discuss when you do your case study assignments for this last unit. So look through those, and of course anything you pick up from your readings that you think is relevant as well is fine. And then you can link those. Here's what I think is a positive factor that this person might have in the written description of the case, and here's something that I think might be a barrier. So identify kind of the pros and cons in each case, and then try to predict whether you think that person is going to really struggle to adhere to physical activity and why that is. And I don't expect necessarily that you'll have the ideal plan for them, that you'll know exactly what to do with them first and all that, but if you can get the first part of it, which is what would put this person at risk, then that's a good place to start. Excuse me. So do the best that you can on that. All right, let's move on. Now, I wanted to talk to you about a bit of data that we collected several years ago. We did a study on a lot of the rec center users. You can see here from the numbers, those N's in parentheses are the number of people in each group. We had about almost 1,100 in this study, maybe 1,200, closer to 1,200, I think. And we did some comparisons across those folks who were non-users, and we defined them as using the rec center less than 4 times in a semester. Infrequent users who were only going maybe 1 to 2 times per week, and then anyone who was using the rec center 3 or more times per week. So you can look at this as somewhat of an adherence study, and we looked at some of the factors that predicted who were to be more likely users. Now, we did assess whether they exercise outside of the rec center or not, but it tended to be that the frequent users were the most active of the groups. So it wasn't, for example, that the infrequent users were exercising 5 times a week outside of the rec center. The frequent users were, more than 3 times as likely to meet physical activity guidelines based on 5 days a week for 30 minutes. And if you look between the non-users and the infrequent users, they're really not too much different there. I mean, they're maybe 50% higher than the non-users, but both groups are substantially lower than the frequent users. And the frequent users were much more likely than any of the other groups to have increased their physical activity since high school. Although it's good to note that because of access to the rec center, most likely many of the students who came there increased their physical activity levels from high school, which, if you're not a student athlete, in high school is when you're lowest, forced physical activity, basically, because in your youth up to grade 6, and sometimes in middle school you have required regular physical activity, but in high school it's oftentimes not a requirement. It's a voluntary elective or something of that nature. The priorities of the frequent users were much higher, and the intentions to be physically active were significantly higher as well. So the priority of it by frequent users was placed as very important, 70% of frequent users, whereas less than half of the other two groups would place that as very important. And so intentions to be physically active and the priority placed on being physically active are two of the biggest components to predicting short-term adherence. So we would predict based on these results that the frequent users would be much more likely to continue to use the rec center in the future. We found no connection with academics, which is not necessarily that surprising in a college population because of the variability in the type of students that come in there. Because, of course, some students come to the rec center to procrastinate, and they'll spend hours over there and not so much worry about their classes. And other students come there because they love to be busy and they love to do all of it at one time. So, in a high school context, they have linked up academics with fitness. So there have been a couple of really good studies that have shown that more fit students perform better on end-of-year testing. Now, this to me is an absolutely amazing, critical finding that is missed by much of the educational administration in many states and at the federal level as well. So we continue to remove physical education and physical fitness opportunities such as recess and play and out of the curriculum, and we continue to put more time and emphasis on academic subjects like history and math, but we miss this idea that being able to run and play and be fit may actually help you perform better academically instead of just spending another 45 minutes per day trying to study history. So I've always been of the opinion, and I'm not a physical educator that works in the school system, that we're really missing out here by not requiring, an hour of physical activity time for basically every student in the entire country, and making that happen. I really feel like we're missing out a lot, and a lot of the policies that are now being created. If you check out the link in the resources folder to the National Activity Plan, there's now a new National Physical Activity Plan. They are now re-emphasizing how to get physical activity and phys ed back into the school system as one of their critical pieces for school children. Gender, there was some gender differences here, and I'm not exactly sure why they came out this way, but if you look in the frequent users, it was a pretty even split there. There were many more men in that group than there were in the infrequent or non-users, suggesting that a higher percentage of frequent users were men, although overall, as you can see, women were the highest in our sample in terms of responding to the survey, which is an artifact of when you do survey research, women are more likely to respond. So even though we invited everybody to respond to the survey, there's a bias there that more women were more likely to respond. A couple more results related to motivation and confidence. The frequent users had a balance of motives. So you might remember from your 272 class, task and ego motives. The frequent users had both. So they had task motives in the sense they wanted to improve themselves, but they're also competing against other people they saw in there. They wanted to look better, they wanted to go faster, they wanted to go longer on the Stairmaster. There was much more confidence and self-efficacy in the frequent exercisers group, which is supports self-efficacy theory that suggests your previous experience with physical activity is the most important factor in predicting your self-efficacy, and then of course your future physical activity. And then barriers decreased as you went up from infrequent up to the frequent groups. Some of the barriers that were relevant, as you can see here, that were endorsed by the non-users, like why do you not use the rec center more? You can see the first two are the most common you would see in any sample of young or older adults. It would be lack of time, feeling too tired. The lack of time issue is really a lack of priority, because in many cases there are very busy students and faculty and other professionals that come to the rec that are physically active, and so it's not necessarily a matter of the number of barriers you have or your work schedule, but it's how you prioritize that time. So let's take a somewhat extreme example of two doctors who work crazy schedules and work 65 hours a week. I've met a couple doctors here in Morgantown that train for triathlons professionally. So here you have people working 60 hours a week and training probably 15 to 20 hours a week and have kids. So you can imagine they don't have a lot of other extra free time outside of that. But then there's other doctors or health professionals who are working 40 or 50 hours a week, a kind of a normal work schedule, and they would say, well, I don't have time to be physically active. So what they really mean is, I don't want to, which is okay, and they're not prioritizing it. But most people have time. It's just a matter of the priorities how we use that time. Some of the other barriers is parking did come out a little bit, but it wasn't one of the strongest ones. It was too crowded. So there, among non-users, probably one of the strongest specific barriers was it's just crowded. I don't like going there at peak times, and so these folks could be encouraged to come at off times when it's not as jam-packed. So basically after 3 or 4, it's quite a zoo in there if you've ever spent any time in the rec center. Other barriers that are maybe a little bit more understandable are lack of knowledge of what to do. And the cool thing that the rec center has done since we did this research for them was they've made personal training free, and they've made people more accessible on the floors. So all those people that are out there now did not used to be there. It used to be just a free-for-all. And so at least now, if you're comfortable enough, there's someone there that can instruct you in any of the machines, and you can have free individualized personal training if you're a student, which I think is a very helpful thing to reducing these barriers. Not having someone to exercise with was just another one. So, from that research, it does show you that there's some substance to the theories, and it's, I think, just a good example showing you factors that are linked to the adherence. As we transition now and start to think about key principles from the behavior change models, you might pull out that handout if you already have it printed out, or you want to pull it up from eCampus, because it's going to go through a much more thorough list of those principles, and I'm going to highlight a few of them myself. Now, these principles that I've compiled here are from working with weight loss and exercise participants over the last 10 to 15 years. And I'm a real big picture kind of guy, so I prefer to boil down theories and experiences into some key bumper sticker type of points, and I hope that you would take at least some of these bumper sticker points home with you from the class to counteract the common idea that the reason people drop out is because they're lazy, or the reason everyone's obese is because they're lazy. So it's just a much more complex situation than that. So self-motivation is a factor, prioritization is a factor, but to say that, for example, Americans are lazier than other countries, trust me, I've traveled a lot of places. It would be totally inaccurate to say that Americans in general are lazier and that's what's led to our obesity crisis. That's not it at all. It may be a lack of misplaced of priorities. It might be a combination of the environment and the change in our culture, but it's certainly not alone laziness. And so the theories help you understand how to work with people. Now, if you can imagine this, let's say you're a personal trainer. Here's another reason this is important. If you think, let's say your client comes in, they're heavy, and they want you to help them get more fit. Very standard kind of situation for a personal trainer. And your perception of them is that they're lazy. And that's how they got this way. That's how they got so fat and they're slobby now. And you have a kind of a negative bias towards them. Now, this is a person that you're working for, and frankly, you hope they come back so they can keep paying you. So that particular bias that you have is actually preventing you from being any good at your job. Because if they're lazy, then you would I would assume have the perception, well, I can't really help you. You just need to step it up and do it. Right? Now, if you have the idea that maybe they don't have the skills, and you can help teach them the skills they need to know and the right way to think and the proper attitude, okay, now you have something to work on. But if you're constantly thinking of people as just they're lazy, then why even get into the field and try to help them? Like, are you doing it for you or are you doing it for them? You really need to think about that question as you get into your profession. Are you trying to help people or are you trying to help yourself? Because we're not, this is not a career for capitalists. We're not in finance. I'm not going to work at the stock market. I'm not trying to make money for myself or other people. I'm trying to certainly provide for my family, but we're trying to help people and make the world a better place. So if you can keep that in mind, then it helps you to see people in a different light, I think. And the theories really help you do that in a structured way. I've mentioned this a couple times, that this idea of willpower, and it's just overrated. It comes from sports where, this team just wanted it more. It's one of the most ridiculous sayings in sports psychology, and I would say that's true in exercise psych as well. He wanted it more, or he prayed more. Well, if that were the case, then the sports psych consultant would just go to the team and say, listen, everybody, all we got to do is want it more than them. So from now until tomorrow, before this big game, I want you to really think about how much you want it. And that's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. So the same is true for a person trying to lose weight. You don't try to only get them fired up. And in fact, sometimes you might need to back people off and say, no, let's start slower. I don't want people going out of the gate at 100%. This is not sports. This is not a sprint. You're trying to help people change their health behavior. This is a slow jog, trot, walk. If you've got 50 pounds to lose, let's do it in a year or two. And let's just make sure that person keeps walking for a year or two. So I'm less worried about how much they lose the first month. I'm worried about, am I going to still see them in 6 months? Okay, so I'm worried about time. And so the motivation and planning are the things we have to help people tap into as an exercise psychologist. We got to understand what things might motivate them and what types of motives work better in the long term. And then we have to help them plan to overcome barriers as soon as they begin so that they don't get knocked off. Okay, as opposed to only selling the benefits. So that third point here is oftentimes personal trainers will talk to their client about, oh, it's going to be awesome, you're going to feel great, you're just going to be so good, you're going to get great results from this. It's almost like they're becoming their own Bowflex commercial. And so it's an oversell, and then when they go exercise, it under-delivers. So here we are over-promising, and then the first 2 weeks they're just feeling sore, they're hurt, it kind of sucks for them. And then all of a sudden what we've told them, what we've sold them is not true. So we need to under-promise and over-deliver. Let's start slower, let's do something manageable, let's focus on the long term, and ignore this possibility of losing 20 pounds in 8 weeks, or whatever the tagline of a lot of these commercials is. We have to go the opposite. So if you're unsure, watch the Bowflex commercial, download it online, and then do the complete opposite of that as your approach to working with somebody. I often cite that just because of my favorite commercial, because they always pick people in that look very strange to me. They're all kind of veiny and ripped in a kind of weird way, and I just don't know who aspires to look like that, and to what does that do for you to look that particular way. You just basically look dehydrated. We talked earlier about the Kamichik idea that there's different motivation to start and different motivation to maintain. So at the beginning, particularly for someone who is sedentary, who is unfit now, not your athlete, they need to start slowly and build momentum. So they need to almost set goals that are too low so that they definitely succeed, as opposed to these super goals that people set a lot of times, and they just end up failing and then they get frustrated. So at least if we're meeting goals, now we're starting to build confidence. The action-oriented program refers to the trans-theoretical model, with the ideas that a lot of strategies like self-monitoring and social support and getting a partner are ready for someone who's already made the commitment and they are themselves ready to be physically active, whereas many people are still in pre-contemplation or contemplation and really haven't gone through the proper planning and identifying barriers so that they can prevent relapse. And here in just a couple moments I'll help you identify how you do that with folks so that you can stop them from dropping out before it happens. So you want to identify the pitfalls before they walk right into it. And I truly believe without some type of intervention or a different approach, most people will continue to struggle to change. So you can't expect to get different results if you have the same approach. So at some juncture, an individual has to take a different approach, or they'll just continue to get the same results and be very unsatisfied with that. So some of the key things that almost all of you, if you're working with somebody to help them change their physical activity behavior, and this is true for rehab, athletic trainers, these are very useful things to maybe have a checklist in your brain. Okay, let me make sure I just discuss these things with each person I work with. Not all of them will be relevant, but many of them will. So if anytime someone's trying to change their behavior, be it I want to quit smoking, I want to start being more physically active, I want to eat better, I want to drink more water, I want to do my rehab, whatever it is, and you can evaluate yourself and your own behavior change on to see if you did these processes of change. So in your textbook, if you want to read a little bit more about these, it's back in the theories chapter. I believe there's chapter 3 and 4, and they go into the processes of change. So these are the processes underlying the stages that help people progress. So in my experience, here are some of the key ones. Identifying and reducing barriers. So if you start, you're changing your behavior, just look ahead a couple weeks, a month, and think, okay, here's my plan. What could stop me from doing this? What about me, my own personality? How am I going to stop myself? Or more practical things like my schedule, am I having to travel? What are my kids doing? Identify those things ahead of time, and then develop a backup plan, a plan B for, when that occurs, here's what I'm going to do to make sure I can keep sticking with my goals. Okay, it's very simple. It's not heavy psychology. Anybody could do it. Talk with your client about that. Help them identify, what's this going to do for me right now? So the goal that they've set, I want to lose 20 pounds by my daughter's wedding in 6 months, is obviously a meaningful goal or they wouldn't have set it. However, between now and that 6 months, they need some other meaningful benefits that they might get. Otherwise, that's hard to be motivated that long just to see that one particular goal. So the meaningful benefits might be better energy, might be less stress, might be better sleep, might be clothes fitting better. So you help them identify those things and become more mindful of them, and then they actually do serve as reinforcers, and they're in your control. They're within your own autonomy to reward yourself. You do have to have this reevaluation component. So you evaluate your environment for the cues. It's a good one for food. So let's say you're trying to eat more fruits and vegetables. No, let's take another one. Let's take a more common one for students. Let's say you want to drink less soda. It's a very common one students set in my class. Well, you evaluate your environment, meaning that in your house, what's there? Okay, it's loaded and stocked with Mountain Dew. That would be my personal favorite. So you would say, okay, after this case of Mountain Dew is finished, I'm not buying any more. Or you would give it to one of your friends who came over and say, please take it out of my house. You would change your environment. And you would ask your roommates, hey, can you guys please not buy, guys or gals, please not buy soda for the next couple weeks. I'm going to try to change this. You might also then, buy some bottled water, the flavored sparkling water, whatever it takes to make sure you have a substitute. You would then go outside of your home and say, well, when am I most likely to drink soda? Before this class, when I go out, during work, when is it? When do I have access to it? So then you say, oh man, I work at a pizza shop and I have free soda anytime I want. Well, that's going to be a challenge because you're probably not going to quit work. So you've got to then have a plan for how you're going to deal with that. Normally you drink two Mountain Dews during each shift. Well, can you shift to a diet soda if you're not trying to get rid of caffeine, but you're just trying to get rid of the calories? Or can you go to the lemonade or something else as a translation? So you think through your environment, what you encounter. Hey, when I go out, I usually drink rum and Cokes. You'd be surprised how many students have this problem. And so what I'm going to drink instead is vodka tonic, okay? Obviously, only students over 21 of age drink here in Morgantown, West Virginia. Or not. Self-liberation, it has to do with, is right before you get into action and you start to think about how's this going to change me and liberate me from my current experience of something that I'm really not satisfied with. So it really has to do with your priorities. And are you ready to liberate from the comfortable state you're in right now to what's going to be somewhat uncomfortable for probably like 6 months until you get into maintenance? Are you ready to do that? And then do you have support, which would come next in the next stage? What kind of support do you need? Who are you going to ask for help? Who are you going to tell these goals to help you? Your roommate, your mom, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whomever. Sorry. I guess I spent a lot of time on that slide. Okay, let's go through the relapse prevention model. Now, this is just a kind of a specific flow chart. I'm going to walk you through the high risk and the low risk responses. I'm going to walk you through a high risk situation where there's an increase in stress while you're trying to accomplish your physical activity goals. And so this could be an injury, school demands, exam week, anything. So a person with no coping response, if you follow me down on the bottom here, would then experience lowered self-efficacy, and they would think, this isn't going to go well. I'm not cut out for this. These goals are too hard. They would then not exercise. They would perceive that they have a failure. They might be frustrated, and this is then going to, of course, increase the likelihood that they relapse if that continues to occur. So having no coping response identified ahead of time leads to perception of failure and reduced self-efficacy. Now, if you can have a coping response, such as, okay, I can't run because I sprained my ankle, but I'm going to go ahead, I think I can ride the bike, and I do have access to a bike near my work, or this is what I can do, and you know what, I'm frustrated, but I need to keep going. So you have a change in your thought, you have a plan. This then increases self-efficacy, also allows you to continue your momentum, and it results in a decreased probability of relapse. So our job in Exercise Psych is to help clients build these coping responses for any specific high-risk situation that they can identify. And we do that through a variety of surveys and also through intake interviews. So to summarize some of the recommendations for intervention as we transition into the last part of this particular unit, one of the things, and this is from your reading, I'm sorry it's not a better copy, it's I can't get a hold of a newer copy of that book, and it's just a good chapter, and I wish I was able to provide you with a better copy. Looks like someone's mowing their lawn next door, so I'm going to go ahead and transition to a new location. So here's some of the recommendations from ACSM, which is the American College of Sports Medicine, on after you set an exercise prescription with a client, what you're supposed to do with them on the behavioral side. So these are what they call recommended components of exercise adherence interventions. So you help them set goals. We've talked about that. You find out how confident they are. And I would say in addition to that, if you the sixth one down, you help them remove or reduce barriers to what's causing them to be not confident. You do a lifestyle assessment and have them receive feedback, and I'm going to go through what that looks like. in just a few moments. You help them understand what they're expected to do, so that's a behavioral contract and clear goal outcome specified. You help them develop social support or provide one at the facility, and then you follow up with patients over time to see how it's going. So this process, if you're a personal trainer or if you're an athletic trainer, and you're getting consumed with the exercise prescription, these are things that would help you think beyond the actual exercise prescription. Now, if you're a personal trainer, strength coach, athletic trainer, obviously one of your main jobs is to develop that exercise prescription. You assess, you identify, you do fitness testing, you do flexibility testing, you develop an exercise prescription that's going to meet that client's needs. And that is a core job duty. However, my suggestion is that if you can develop some of these skills and add them on to what you already know, you'll go from being average to good or from being good to excellent. I think some of these things are reasonably simple, and with some training, you'll be able to do them, and they can make a big difference in the clients you're working with. And in terms of the quality of service you're providing, it will be huge. Okay, some guiding principles. The first point there really refers to the relapse prevention model. So we want to teach people skills and strategies before they drop out. So we're gonna look the road ahead. We're gonna find out where the potholes are. We're gonna help them steer around them. We're gonna give them the map so that they can steer on themselves. We're going to help them self-regulate, meaning they can do the skills themselves, and monitor their own stuff. And we're going to help them monitor the benefits that they're getting that are meaningful. And they might do that on a real simple exercise journal. And those things will help them build intrinsic motivation and feel in control of the process. And according to Kmichik and the readings you've had in that area, if you can tune them into the intrinsic stuff, it will help them sustain motivation beyond their initial extrinsic goals. So it's not that the extrinsic goals are bad, it's just that they fade over time. And once they're either not relevant, or even if they've met their goals, so I've seen a lot of weight loss people meet this arbitrary goal they've set, let's lose 40 pounds, for example. They meet it, and then they don't know what to do, because that's why they were exercising, was to meet that goal. And now that they've met it, they're like, oh, what do I do now? So they're not really sure what to do next. And they haven't developed any sort of meaningful reason to continue. They have no purpose. So they need a purpose at some point in the process. Over the last 10 years or so, 13 years actually now, wow, we've done a lot of work with the exercise physiology program here, and they have a clinical exercise program in the human performance lab. And so this shows you just one example of a structure of an exercise adherence program that fits within kind of a regular fitness facility. So I'm going to talk about the type of people we work with and who they are, and give you a couple examples of this. So they get referred. They're typically people that are a little bit older and a little bit sicker. They can come into this exercise facility, and I'll show you the demographics in a moment. They get their exercise test. They get an exercise session with an exercise physiologist, and then they meet with us after they take a survey. They do an interview, and then we follow up with them to see how things are going. Sometimes it's not 2 to 3 weeks. It might be 4 to 6 weeks. It might be 2 months later, but depending on their risk, we're going to try to follow up with them. So the key point here is that our work in the exercise psych stuff is complementary and does not replace fitness assessments, doctor referrals, all the other critical components of exercise physiology or a fitness facility. It's complementary. The demographics of the people we've seen have a variety of health problems. You can see they're a little bit hypertensive. If you don't know blood pressure, if you're getting over 140 and over 80, then you're getting to be into pre-hypertension. Hypertension is 150 over 90. BMI on average 31 and 32. If you're not familiar with that, you should go calculate your own BMI. If you put in BMI calculator in Google or wherever else, you'll be able to pull that up. But obese is 30. So on average, these folks are obese. And on average, they're in their 50s and 60s. And I would say this has gotten a little bit younger since I put this data together. They're probably in their 40s and 50s now because we've had a lot more people that are younger working adults, 30s and 40s, as well. You can see there are some mental health issues there, 15 to 20% clinically depressed. And then some have hypertension, some have cardiovascular disease, some have diabetes. And so it's a fairly high-risk physical population. And so those people may be a little bit more in need. What do our people do? They write notes, they summarize data, they try to help the exercise physiology people understand the psychology of each individual client. So they come to supervision meetings, they discuss the clients, process next steps, go to the staff meeting, talk about those client risk factors, and almost like a medical round type of environment. They, of course, contact people, establish rapport, and then occasionally we do handouts and other things. But the bulk of the work we do in this particular program is individual counseling with each participant that comes through, and we also then individually and in a group interact with the staff. So we have kind of two roles there. One is work directly with the patients, and the second is to work with the staff to help them be trained better and to also do the work, because we're not working with them one-on-one every week, whereas these people are often seeing them 2 and 3 times a week. They have the potential to impact them more. And so if we can train the trainer, in this case be an exercise physiologist or a personal trainer, then my work as an exercise psychologist might hit 10 people instead of 1. So if I can train one person who's a fitness professional to be better, they might impact 100 people in a year, versus me having to individually see people. It's not a very efficient model. What do we do in our work? We do interviews with them, and we also do interventions. And what we explore are their exercise history. What have they done maybe in the last 5 to 10 years? What kind of barriers do they have, both physically in their schedule or cognitively? And the cognitive barriers could also be personality. What kind of skills have they already developed to overcome barriers? So I might ask them, for example, what kind of barriers have already come up, or how have they managed those situations that have come up? And then we're going to look at what are their actual goals and what do they intend to do. So then we would provide feedback, and then there would be a survey that links up with some of these ideas as well. And usually this is a fairly brief intervention, about 30 minutes or so. So we would initially do what we call kind of an intake, get to know them, talk to them about what data we've already seen from them, and then we would follow up and give them a plan, and then follow up with them after that. So some of the data that we have access to that I would recommend that you would think about collecting would be all of the ex-phys stuff that is normal in a very good high-functioning center, human performance labs. So they do a very good job of testing people, and they actually get their body fat and their VO2 max, which is their functional capacity, whereas a lot of fitness centers don't really do that. I highly recommend that anyone who's a fitness professional get some sort of baseline measure of fitness, even if it's a simple walks test, a step test, a push-up, sit-up test. You got to have some baselines to give them feedback on it. And then we get a lot of the psychosocial stuff in between surveys and also in the interview. So we use all that information to determine a person's risk to drop out. And we use 3 general categories. You could use 5 or whatever you want, but we use this person's low risk, this person's moderate risk, this person's high risk. So if they're low risk, then that would indicate we would not provide much follow-up information or intervention. If they're moderate risk, we're going to intervene, we're going to develop a plan, we're going to follow up. If they're high risk, we're going to intervene, we're going to develop a plan, we're going to follow up. So moderate and high risk are really treated the same, and low risk are really not given additional attention because they probably are going to be fine. And so we're promoting continuation of physical activity. That's the promotion-focused model. We are identifying and promoting physical activity through the interventions and by being proactive in our screening. So some of the interventions and tools that we use in our meetings is self-monitoring, and these the use of self-monitoring is primarily geared at awareness and mindfulness of the behaviors they're trying to change. So on a daily basis, they would have a calendar, an app on their phone, daily alarm reminder off their phone, something that is going to cue them into physical activity and constantly be poking at them to remind them. They might also, it serves as a barometer of change, these self-monitoring forms. And you may also have them develop pointed decision prompts. So, for example, when they leave the house, they might have their gym bag there at all times, so that they have they remind, okay, do I need to clean clothes? Do I have my shoes? They might put a note up on the way out the door that has something meaningful for them, or on their mirror when they get up in the morning, so that they are at the time where they have to decide, am I going to do it today? They are forced to make a choice. And hopefully many times they'll make a good choice. Maybe not every time, but they get in their car, there's a sticky note that says gym on it, or go for it or something. And so they drive to the gym or they drive home. And those are the points of decision that people need to master. They seem fairly simple, but a lot of people do struggle. Behavioral contracts are used with moderate and high risk clients. Writing out a list of things. Here's barriers. Here's what I'm going to accomplish. Almost like a prescription. In the next 4 weeks, I want you to do this 3 times a week for 4 weeks for 30 minutes, just as you would if you got a medication. What does it say? Take this dose, 30 minutes, every day, repeat. Come back and see me in a month. So exercise as a prescription, almost like a medical intervention. And then if they would like to set rewards, hey, if I do this for a month, then you can help them do that. Do they need more social support? Who would that be? Would they like a partner? Where would that person be? So we do explore a social support network with folks. And then if we're going to use goal setting, we try to make it meaningful and measurable. So the goals should have a purpose. They should be measurable and specific enough so that they link up with self-monitoring. And we've talked about that in your assignment. As part of goals, any goal would have barriers and then would have backup plans related to that particular barrier. So let's have a look at a case. This is Carlos. This is actually not Carlos, just another picture of a person from the exercise facility. 48 years old, works as a computer analyst, BMI 26, so he's a little bit overweight but not obese. Has some mild hypertension, which is related to stress. He's not medicated. He's got a pretty good family history of cardiovascular disease and diabetes, but he himself does not have it. He does have an active social hobby. He's a walker, and he's done line dancing for several years. He's got high self-efficacy based on his previous experience, very few barriers, no depression, and then some excuses. So across those psychosocial issues, they look pretty good. So good self-efficacy, not too many barriers. What does he want? He wants to work on his upper body training, which he's not getting, and he wants to improve his fitness. So they're reasonably vague and not easily measured. But overall, due to his physical health, which is reasonably good, he does have some family history that may be motivating him. We're trying to think, what would be some of the assessment issues here, and how would we intervene? Okay, so that's the case description. And when you get more information, we find out that his barriers are related to time and transportation, getting to and from the facility. He's motivated to achieve health benefits. He likes doing it. He looks forward to it. But he's also worried about getting into a routine because of the time and transportation issues. So the intervention strategy in this case, this is from an actual case, obviously the client's name was not Carlos, was to use his past exercise as a building block to help him build confidence. He's going to have a calendar to plan out his exercise and help him deal with the time and transportation issues, and also to serve as a self-monitoring form. And then he's going to have a backup plan if he cannot meet his scheduled appointments on the calendar. Discuss the point of decision prompts in terms of when he's going to be coming to the gym, what's going to make it easier for him to get there. Talked about his family and his support. And in this case, he was indicated, he was marked as low risk, and so he got a one-time only intervention in this case. So it was a fairly brief intervention, and this is the kind of idea or structure that I want to see out of your assignment. So you're going to be given the case information in Unit 4. Well, you're already given it. It's there for you to check out. You're given the case studies, so I want you to look through what you see. Look back through the models and the material from the first part of this particular unit or the podcast and the slides, and then identify some things that you're assessing. What are the pros and cons? Do almost like a decisional balance sheet on here's the positives, here's the negatives. So in his case, these two might be marked as positives. So if I were listing it on paper, I might list it out something like this. So that might be a positive factor. It kind of appears self-motivated. He's a little worried about getting into the routine, so I might mark that as a negative factor. And then this really is neutral to some degree, but those are his barriers. They're kind of low, but in a sense that he only has 2 barriers. A lot of people discuss a lot of those things. Okay, he's reasonably fit, has a lot of good experience. So other factors that are not listed here in his assessment, he has good previous experience. He's familiar with everything with the exception of the weight training. So he has good skills. And he's got a previous, just a strong belief in physical activity and being active. And even his hobbies are active. So the intervention is fairly light. And then he was not necessarily followed up with in this case because he's in the lower risk end of adherence. So in looking at your own case studies, hopefully you can apply that, and certainly feel free to ask me any questions if you're not sure where to proceed. In summary, in this particular unit, obviously this has only been an hour or a little less than an hour of time to get you trained to understand this, and it does take more time to get really good at it. But hopefully the idea is, when you're working with somebody, if you have the theories, they will help you make the process more predictable for yourself and others. And you can do that through, collecting survey data, through doing an intake, a lifestyle assessment. And that process of proactively addressing the problems before they happen has helped a lot of people. Now, we do not, and I would never tell you that we do. We don't help everybody we meet with. Because some people really have difficult circumstances or simply not really ready anyway to commit to the process. So there's certain people that cannot be helped, and there's other people who do not really want to be helped. And so we don't catch them all, but I can guarantee you that we've caught some of them and helped them make changes on their own that they've done. And that's a really rewarding experience to help people reach the health goals that they have. And I've done a lot of work in sports psych and exercise psych, and I love working with athletes. Sport was my first love, and the more I do the exercise and the weight loss stuff, I find it to be just as rewarding or even more rewarding because of the potential to help somebody turn around their health and their lifestyle can have really dramatic, lasting effects for them. It is much harder for them to do that, and it's a substantially difficult thing to be regularly active for many people with busy lives and to lose a lot of weight. But the reward and the return is massive. So I encourage you to seek out more help, and if you do end up down the fitness path and you want to get better at this and you'd like me to point you in the direction of some additional resources, I would be glad to do so. So I hope you enjoyed listening to the podcast, and I hope you overall enjoyed the class. Enjoy the rest of your summer. Cheers.